The opening sequence of episode 60 is another cold open and features an extremely carefully crafted sequence with two directly clashing goals. One is to replicate the overall headspace of the series premiere back on Parody, while also two, doing everything in its power to make it feel foreign and unfamiliar. We open with that same ringing in your ears as we see birds fly in the sky above, their reflection gliding across a young boy's green eye. And just as abruptly, we zoom out to see this horrifying destruction all around them. But like I said, it's not just paralleling that day in Shiganshina. Unlike Aaron's trio, who were all just helplessly looking on as the Colossal's monstrous hand crushed the wall, Falco is wearing a military uniform. This isn't their home suddenly being attacked. This is a war zone, and Falco is on the attacker's side. With Parody 2, we would of course see an abrupt cut to Keith and the scouts going beyond the walls, which in many ways, with what we know now, is also a sort of an attack. But in terms of Aaron and Falco, they're being directly mirrored while also being directly paralleled. And saying that, we see that same exact desire for freedom as he just mutters, "It's dangerous here, you'd better fly away." We of course see that he too has the yellow armband. So while our sample pool for what it means is not exactly large, I think you could easily assume that this isn't exactly an army that wants to fight. Falco wants to be that bird flying in freedom. He wants to fly far, far away from this dangerous battleground. And before we move any further, I think it'd be silly not to talk about how, well, everything quite literally looks different because, this is a different studio. I don't know if this is like a loud minority situation or I really just have an unpopular opinion, but I think Wit passing the torch to Mappa for Season 4 works on so many levels that go way beyond just animation. Like we discussed some 2 years ago now, which oh my god, I've been doing this for 2 years, even Wit's art style gradually, but significantly, changed over the course of the first 3 seasons. The heavily stylized, double C thick outlines slowly became more and more rare. The saturated tones became a lot more muted. Typical anime, sudden zoom in on face reaction shots, cinematography, and speed lines and whatever else essentially disappeared altogether, and the list goes on. Watching an episode from Season 4 and then one from Season 2, some of the cinematography in Season 2 seems almost jarring, and I think that's on purpose. With every single passing episode, the show became, for lack of a better expression, more cinematic and more grounded, more real. And so when we hit Season 4 and see this completely foreign look with so much more grit, I think you couldn't write it more perfectly if you wanted to. This is supposed to feel like a whole new world. So yes, a completely different studio, making you pause the episode just to make sure that you're still watching Attack on Titan, I think it's extremely powerful. Very, very minor visual spoilers for the Wano arc of One Piece. They purposely leveraged this complete shift in art style and used it as yet another storytelling device. Wano is essentially meant to be Edo period Japan, so one of the first things you see is the Great Wave of Kanagawa, and when you actually land on the island, the art style also changes completely. It's the show essentially leveraging the very fundamentals of the show itself, in this case the literal visuals and who makes them, to tell you that this is supposed to feel different. Just like we saw with Wit over the course of the first 3 seasons, it's not about being inconsistent, it's about adapting the art style for the story you are telling. My point being that, whether intentional or not, the series gradually becoming more and more cold and more realistic in its visuals, I think is one of those often overlooked things that just brings everything together. You might not even register it along the way, but comparing Sasha's goofy red eyes or Historia's enchanting aura to a random sequence in Season 4, or even the goofy lighthearted scenes in Season 4, makes that tonal contrast extremely clear. I think it's cool to imagine what a Wit-produced final season might have looked like, but based on some of the fan recreations I've seen here and there, I don't think I'd ever really want to trade the Mappa version. Okay, enough about that, let's get back to the episode. One thing we have to talk about right away though is all the foreshadowing of Falco's Falcon Titan here. Very classy naming scheme, Isayama. We'll get to other cases of very subtle Flying Titan foreshadowing later in the season, but considering all the Eren parallels, some of these scenes certainly hit a little bit different. If we jump ahead a little, we see him mumble about how he doesn't know who any of them are, and that he thought he was flying around with swords and slicing up Titans. Which, that doesn't make any sense, you're not a scout, sit down. When Eren gets memories without even having the Titan, that makes sense to a certain degree. The Founding Titan, it completely transcends time. The Jaw, on the other hand, well, that doesn't make any sense. Which, by the way, side notes, do we actually ever even see Freckles Amir using ODM gear to fight like anything outside of training? She was in Trost, yes, but I'm pretty sure she's never actually flying around and fighting anything. But okay, that's beside the point. This whole thing was so odd, in fact, that many people were straight up convinced that Falco would inherit Eren's Titans. Because again, this is basically Eren's dream in episode 1. Titan memories without having any Titans. So with that said, I have 3, or kind of 4, separate interpretations for this. Numero 1 is a very dry and very boring in-universe explanation. It's as simple as them just having been briefed on parody, and this is him just getting his head bonked a bit too hard and recounting things he's actually heard. And to take that one step further, he could also be recounting things that Reiner, or perhaps Gabi from Reiner, might have told him about in private. No one in the squad is surprised in the least by what he's saying, so I don't think this is like something revolutionary that is like, oh, what are you talking about? What is this flying around thing? No one's really surprised. Explanation numero 2, on the other hand, is a whole lot more overanalyzing and certainly a bit more unhinged. He is transformed by Zeke's spinal fluid and his scream, and his eventual Jaw Titan would also feature abnormal beast-like properties rather than, well, just a jaw. So, perhaps he too gets pulled into the timey-wimey shenanigans right alongside Zeke and Eren somehow, just like his Titan form? It's definitely a massive stretch, but obviously Isayama was doing something with the whole Falcon Titan that's actually just the jaw, so it's not even really a falcon because it should be a beast, but for some reason it's the jaw. I don't know, maybe? Then again, these lines are actually not in the manga. But then again, the anime is supposed to be Isayama's final version for the story, so you know what? I don't know. I think they've just been briefed. But we still got more, because explanation number 3 is very dumb, but I genuinely think this might be the actual reason. I think there is a very good chance that they literally wanted to make sure that you just don't stop watching. No, like seriously. Everything Gabi says here is pure recap, so I genuinely think this might be a case of, no, you are still watching Attack on Titan. Yes, people are flying around with swords and fighting titans. This is just a different introduction to what you might expect. See, the armor titan's right here too. This episode is dropping an absolute boatload of information onto people, so casual viewers might straight up be confused. And judging by the number of Reddit threads, I think they definitely were. And finally, numero 4, I don't think this is particularly likely, but I think this could also be a case of very bad and not thought out fanservice. What I mean by that is that they chose to add this very distinct line to parallel Eren's bizarre long dream one as just a callback and nothing more. And I say it's bad fanservice because while it may be kinda cool, it completely ignores the logic of the series. Callbacks are great and very fun, but you shouldn't really do that at the expense of the story, you know? Again, I don't think this is particularly likely, and like I said, I just think Falco knows details about the scouts, and that's literally it. But alright, roll back the script because we're still 30 seconds into the episode. What I absolutely love here is how we are pulled from that dissociative state and thrown right into the non-stop blasting that engulfs the battlefield. Like many times before, it's that stark juxtaposition between what you expect to hear and what is actually on screen that makes it hit so hard. We have Falco just mumbling to himself about how the bird should flee, only for us to then suddenly zoom out and see 2 blown apart dudes and another ragdoll past the camera. But even so, everything is still dead silent. I just love how surreal that eerie silence is here. But as Colt screams for Falco, we lock in. The soundtrack here is very fittingly named Nightmare. I think those sharp, ominous strings coming in is like the perfect abrupt transition to the full-on trench warfare we're seeing. Shortly after, we are also introduced to Magath, who is of course not wearing the armband. So not only is he the superior in this particular unit, he is also superior, well, in their entire culture, I guess. And that's exactly what we see, with Colt saying that the entire Eldian vanguard has been wiped out. So yes, they put all the Eldians in the very front as meat shields, with Magath then immediately following up with, what about the trenches though? So we already see how, for the Marleyan military, all of the Eldian units are kinda just tools. Because this episode is ludicrously dense as is, we'll get to Magath later in the season, but very broadly speaking, I would describe him as this sort of a mixture between Keith and Erwin on Parody. When we first meet him, he is kind of a typical Marleyan, or, you know, racist. Like we just saw, the entire Eldian unit is the vanguard. But at the same time, unlike Kozlo, who begins screaming and shouting at them, Magath actually listens. He is a military dude through and through. Yes, he does have some biases that have been drilled into him by the Marleyan society, but the warriors and the warrior candidates are important and worth protecting, even if they are all Eldian. For him, even the Eldian units do have intrinsic value for the simple reason that they have intrinsic value for Marley's goals. So when Colt very explicitly says that we have no chance of blasting the rail tracks and we should send in the warriors, Magath does hear him out and eventually even approves it. So prejudice obviously does exist, but he is not blind to reason. Plenty more on Magath soon TM. Cutting back to Falco and Gabi though, outside of the whole flying with swords thing, she very clearly drops a whole bunch of exposition and recap. If you wish to inherit my past memories, please don't, the video is terrible. I talked about this right as Season 4 was airing, but if you thought Attack on Titan had a lot of Chekhov's guns, then oh boy. Following this point, we are in rapid-fire recap territory because everything thus far is being pulled together in like the next 5 episodes. And that is also true right here, only like to the power of 12. I'm not joking. Literally the next sentence is a recap. 1. Marley's now years-long campaign that, as we now know, started because of the wavering power of the Titans against modern technology. 2. How other nations have adapted to said power of the Titans with specific fort designs and cannons and whatever else. 3. That Marley's navy is weak, which is why the shores of Paradis don't have any kind of military presence. And there's also the little fact that it's full of traitors, but you know that's like a minor thing. 4. That Marley's technology is vastly superior to Paradis, with Gabi casually carrying around a stick grenade and, far more importantly, the airship. 5. The inheritance process of the warriors, which 6. happens because of the 13-year curse of Ymir, and finally 7. The successor of all Ryanair's Armored will be the next in line to continue the Paradis campaign. So, yeah, you know all those mysteries we spent like 7 years finding out what they meant? Yeah, so this is just recap to literally all of them. I won't mention it everywhere because these next couple of episodes are really super heavy on just setting up the chessboard, if you will, but so many of these scenes are absurdly dense, and if you wanted to build theories around them, well, this was your golden opportunity. But before we move on, one thing I want to note right away with Gabi's squad are those parallels to Eren's squad. I know that hating on Gabi is very popular in the community, which I sort of understand because, you know, she killed Sasha, but at the same time, you know, that's kind of the point of her entire character, kind of like Flock, but you know what, let's not get into that. Generally, people are just split on how she is meant to be this sort of mirror to Eren. Personally, while I do absolutely think that Gabi and Falco are meant to be this alternate personification of Eren's squad, only ones that were forced into the attacking role right from the get-go, I don't think you should really read into it as a direct mirroring. Rather, I think it's purposely taking a similar archetype and exploring similar themes through a different perspective. In this case, again, that is one that doesn't have this fog of unknowns and mysteries with the Titans and whatnot, but rather ones that know what they are doing. This is a squad who has been indoctrinated to actually believe that conquering these nations is a just cause. Their illusion and their dream shattering wasn't a picturesque world beyond the walls turning out to be already tainted by humanity. For them, it was realizing that they are the ones tainting it. The people on Paradis, they're not devils, they're not meant to be conquered. They are people just like them. Also, side note, I think this insistence of characters having to be like direct mirrors is also why a lot of people think that Historia's and Ymir's stories are bad, even though they were never supposed to be direct mirrors. You know, people see the parallels between them and they're like, what happened to Historia? Why didn't she do anything in the final part? I don't think she was ever meant to do anything in the final part. I've talked about it before, so I'm not going to talk about it again. For now. TLDR, no, Gabi is not meant to be just Eren, but like on the other side, but she also kind of is. This is Attack on Titan, things are complicated, we explore a lot of different themes at the same time, some often contradictory. That's the whole point of this series. Put a pin in that for now though. But with us catching a glimpse of the now very depressed Ryanair, we move into the 6th OP, titled My War. I think I'll speak for a good handful of people when I say that hearing this for the first time was very much like going from the first Death Note opening to the second one, because yeah, this one's pretty extreme. Obligatory, I will eventually make an Overanalyzing OPs video, but I think this opening is one of the most debatable ones in the entire series. First things first, what is up with the colors? And here, I already think you could have a very lengthy debate. The first OP in the series blended these surreal and abstract colorized scenes of the Titans attacking, and then the equally surreal gray and white scenes with all the soldiers. But importantly, all the soldiers were marked with red. They were the beating hearts in this cold and ruthless world fighting back against the insanity of the Titans. Each and every one had a face, and each and every one had a life. My war, on the other hand, is made to feel completely alien. Outside of Eren's Titan making a brief cameo, this opening is the only one to not have a single recognizable face. All the soldiers are the same exact mass of white. The ships are all the same. The only thing breathing life into the scene is fire and destruction. So I think you could interpret it as humanity being given a blank canvas. But instead of that life and color coming from the people, they turn on each other time and time again. That blank canvas is now colored by war. We see the scouts blown apart, we see Marley soldiers blown apart, but in the end, they are all the same crumbled white stones. In a similar vein, I think you could also look at it as just an inversion of the first OP and essentially killing this narrative of a heroic battle against the man-eating monsters. Those abstract colors we saw with the Titans wasn't some otherworldly alien force. It was humanity itself. And so that color that was once there now just becomes yet another force of destruction. Same for those birds falling from the sky. Through some twisted means, it's now their death that colors this blank canvas that is the world. In terms of other visuals, this little base right here does kinda sorta seem like the final fort we see at the very end of the series. The OP also does the typical thing of showing both sides of the war, with us getting shots of the soldiers, then a Titan spine transforming, then more soldiers, then the Colossal's nuke, etc, etc. It's just constant back and forth between the people and the Titans. The shot of the dead hands all reaching up is, like, horrifying though. Not sure if it's just meant to be like these weird mangled contorted arms sticking up, or maybe it's almost meant to be like a zombified hand stretching out in hopes of help. Or maybe it's even like a messed up flower turning to the sun. Whatever the case, it is really messed up. Also, I think you could take Eren's Titan statue thingy to be a representation of his founding Titan form, since, you know, infinitely many stacked up Titans. But very big picture-wise, I think to a certain degree, this opening is almost purposely made not to be analyzed. I think all the almost dissociative imagery, the abstract colors, the rewinding segments, the abrupt cuts, and all of that is meant to convey a headspace rather than ideas or any real narrative. The cover art for this is a schoolgirl holding onto a rifle, and if you listen to the full thing, the lyrics of "The only memory left is trauma, imaginary friends' kind words. The evening train was shaking, I purified the imperfect flowers. The pain in my heart is getting higher, my comedy show at its peak. The frogs were crying on our way home, this is my last war." I think this entire thing is just a visual representation of like every single kind of psychological trauma known to man. As for the title of the episode, Beyond the Ocean, we don't have any time for my wacky, goofy jokes about not knowing why it's called that, so the only thing I'll note here is the continuation of the Beyond naming scheme. Episode 59 was Beyond the Walls, so episode 60 is just telling us we're not stopping there, we're going further. And I suppose you could also theorize about how it might hint toward Eren actually already being beyond the ocean. The title is framed as if it was told from Paradise's point of view, since, you know, beyond the ocean from where? Well, from Paradis. But the only person we see in this episode is Reiner. That is, until the very end of this first episode. Moving into said episode, we get a whole bunch more elaboration on the warrior candidates and how the succession of the Titans is decided. We hear that there are entire grading systems and whatnot, but Gabi insists that, you know, it's all about resolve. And speaking of, she is definitely channeling some Eren energy, because she then says that she'll slaughter every last island devil who, and I quote, have caused us so much pain. This is what I meant when I said that, in many ways, she is meant to parallel Eren while also exploring a drastically different perspective. Eren's unhinged rambling about wanting to slaughter all Titans in Season 1 was, well, unhinged, but it was also perfectly understandable considering they were quite literally man-eating monsters indiscriminately killing them. With Gabi, on the other hand, what she's saying is pure nonsensical indoctrination. Because what do you mean the Paradisians have caused you so much pain? They're on a separate island and you've never met or even seen any of them. She is the outcome of systematic prejudice lumping in all Eldians in a single bucket and scapegoating the Paradisians as the cause for said prejudice. In the same way Eren realizes that he doesn't actually hate Reiner because Marley is to blame, Gabi here doesn't actually hate Paradis either. Really, she hates Marley because of how they treat Eldians as a whole. It's the same lack of perspective that we've seen many times already, only with Gabi, we are long past any abstract and unknown forces at play. We now know the true faces in this war. Another incredible sequence here is the follow-up to Colt and Magath's conversation, with Magath pulling the good old "Are you not a brave soldier of the Marley military" card. But as he says this, we flick through the many shell-shocked soldiers, some even having flies crawling across their face as if they were already corpses. So this entire "Are you a brave soldier" is just completely meaningless, empty propaganda. No one here is a brave soldier, everyone here is terrified. War is not great, no one's happy. We've seen this on Parody, we're seeing the same thing here. And speaking of Parody parallels, there are more. Just like we saw Lord Walt stuffing his face while Trost was being attacked, Kozlo is also just casually waltzing around giving orders that might as well be death sentences, while he himself will probably sit back in the bunker. I think much of this is meant to sort of parallel but also directly mirror Erwin's charge. There, everyone knew that, yes, that's it, we are expendable and we will all die. But they gave their lives for a hope, for a purpose for their own loved ones. In this case though, no one wants to be here. Everyone is equally shell-shocked, but there is also no hope. And the music here, oh boy! Season 4 is
Yamamoto Kota
musical debut in Attack on Titan, and he cooked big time. Get ready to hear this far too many times because I straight up don't have the vocabulary to describe music. But so many of Yamamoto's soundtracks are written like a dance, and I love it. The way the music ebbs and flows as Gabi does her goofy little "if you'd sacrifice 800 men out of love for me," only to then completely shift as she locks in and says that she'll prove that she is worthy of the Armored. It's so good.
Mark my words. I'll destroy that train and prove no.
What are you doing?
My plan won't.
Another thing I love here is how we actually get to hear some of the dialogue between the two dudes as they see Gabi approaching. I think this is another case of the series managing the viewer's attention, so we don't really linger on the fact that these dudes, even while being hammered by Marley's forces, which we know to be superior, never shoot on sight. Our perspective might be planted on Gabi's side, but they are kind of the good guys here. Gabi just ranted about slaughtering all the quote-unquote bad Eldians, but these dudes, even while entertaining the idea that she might suddenly transform, never shoot. Obviously, shooting a surrendering soldier is a war crime, so that makes sense, except feigning surrender is also a war crime, so yeah, Gabi here, not exactly the good guys. She then proceeds to blow the train, and as the drums of war kick in, the warriors make their entrance. This is our first look at the newly recaptured Jaw Titan, and I'm not gonna lie, seeing it jump around like some messed up monkey lion was hype as hell. And to overanalyze, there's of course also the weirdness around his Jaw Titan itself. As we of course see, the Titan forms change pretty drastically between shifters, but Porco's jaw isn't just a jaw, it's almost like a hardened/armored jaw. We talked all about the potential Titan experiment weirdness with the Rod Rice arc, so maybe he is also an outcome of Titan experimentation? We know Marley fed all kinds of weird things to Annie to see what abilities she could replicate. And we know that Eren gained the ability to harden after slurping down the armored spinal fluid. So maybe Porco's jaw is also an outcome of that? Then again, his Titan form is also like identical to Marcel, so maybe there's like a lineage factor that eventually decides what your Titan form will look like, or maybe Marley just did the same thing with both of them, because you know, like, one of them died, might as well do the same thing again? No clue. My point being that, it's not that their jaw is durable, or strong, or even hardened, it's that their entire face is also armored. Also, the track that plays here is called Splinter Wolf, and the episode actually left out the vocal section that makes the track sound 100% like the Season 1 to 3 OSTs with their typical vocals. A very big recommend if you have never heard the full version, once again, called Splinter Wolf. We then cut on over to the airship where we see, presumably, a number of sedated Eldians. Because I think this is a top tier fun fact, I'll mention it again. This strategy is actually not the first time we're seeing this. The Shiganshina offensive employed the same exact strat, only they were buried with little breathing tubes rather than airdropped in. Another interesting parallel here is Zeke being called the Spear, while Reiner is their shield. Absolutely overanalyzing here, but during the coup d'etat, Erwin argued that losing the scouts would be akin to losing their spear. So maybe you could spin up theories about how Reiner would eventually be protecting the remnants of humanity while many of the scouts would turn to the Jaegerists and Zeke would be pursuing destruction. Okay, that is a massive stretch that doesn't really make any sense, ignore that. We then jump on over to one of my personal favorite mid-cards in the entire series. I think the way the military is represented here just goes so hard. It's such a cool mid-card, I like it. That said though, this is also one of the most misleading, I guess, in the series. It talks about how Marley is a military kingdom that saw a second rise after Helos brought an end to the Great Titan War. That's great and all, and we'll talk about Helos a little bit later in the series as well. But it then talks about how Marley controls 7 of the 9 Titans and uses them to crush the other nations. 9 years ago, that was true. The only Titans they didn't control was the Attack Titan and the Founding Titan. Now, on the other hand, they have just 4, 5 if you count the Warhammer. So again, if more casual viewers were already confused about why we're suddenly following a older Reiner invading a completely different nation, then suddenly talking about how Marley has seemingly recaptured more Titans certainly doesn't help matters. Honestly, I have no idea why it's there, or perhaps if there is some subtext about them once controlling the 7 Titans, and that sort of gets lost in translation, but it is what it is. In English, it's just a little bit confusing and kinda sorta misleading. The visuals, though, those go hard. Returning to the episode, much like with the OP, we just see countless bodies blasting at each other and just full-blown trench warfare. Not a single word is spoken for a good minute as we just see an absolute bloodbath. Countless artillery shells constantly blowing up, machine guns blasting non-stop, Porco's Titan tearing up railroads, Peak special unit breaching the trenches. It's just this super raw moment of, all capital letters, war. And we also get this incredible, chilling shot of a soldier climbing a mountain of bodies and just looking on at the battlefield. It's all just so raw, I love it. Another important thing we see here is Falco pulling in the wounded soldier and performing first aid. Firstly, because Gabi says he's following international law, aka she knows she was committing a war crime by feigning surrender. But secondly, to very explicitly establish the sort of push-pull dynamic we'd see between Falco and Gabi for the rest of the season. Eventually, that of course leads to her realizing that there were in fact no devils at all. But because this is Attack on Titan and not a fantasy fairy tale, even the rescued soldier just begins to mutter that Falco would sully him and that he is a filthy devil. So yes, depressing and bad all around. They might have had second thoughts about shooting at Gabi, and they were sort of the good guys, but now that they're actually in the trenches and sitting side by side, that hate, it's just always there. Also, one thing I didn't mention with the transition to Studio Mappa was that all the Titans would now be CG, as opposed to most of Wit's 2D Titans and even the Mappa trailer. Which, by the way, I know a lot of people are confused about the trailer. The reason why those scenes never appear in the actual show is just for consistency's sake. That trailer is not an actual trailer. It's like a half-fake vertical slice of not just Season 4 Part 1, but the rest of the series made as promo, and that's it. A creative decision was made that CG would be used for the Titans, and so CG is used absolutely everywhere, even if you have like a handful of 2D scenes. Visual consistency is infinitely more important. You really don't want people being pulled out of the experience with constant stylistic whiplash. But anyway, the reason why I bring this up is because, generally, I am not a huge fan of CG. Not out of principle, I'm not going to be one of those people who just, oh, I dropped the series because it has CG. I'm totally cool with it being used, but it just usually doesn't look all that great. And again, I love Wit, but we've seen that in Attack on Titan. Their CG was sometimes very spotty. Mappa though, they came out swinging, and by the end of the series, there are many scenes that, if I didn't know they were CG, I genuinely couldn't tell you. I made a separate video a few months back talking about general animation trends in the industry, and I talk about Attack on Titan there too. But Mappa's compositing department needs to be studied. Obviously, it's not perfect. There are flaws here and there, just like there is with 2D. But I think they did an incredible job bringing Season 4 to life with now entirely CG Titans. Okay, enough of that, I gotta move away from the mic. It's time, we see the airship lock in. It's time for ashes on the fire. Look, I don't even know how to narrate this part. This part of the script is written in all caps. This is easily top 3 all-time OSTs, period. I rewatched this scene like 40 times when the episode came out. Yes, Zeke screams and transforms people, but we already saw that on Parody, so no need to overanalyze. It is such a cool climax to the episode, and ashes on the fire. Okay, deep breaths. It's been 4 years since this came out. I'm sure I can compose myself. Okay, it's not funny anymore. Enough. This is what you call a subversion because you expected me to play it again, but I didn't. Once again, the way the sequence plays out with the constant back and forth is beautiful. We see the onslaught of all the Titans crashing down, this ridiculous mass of destruction immediately wreaking havoc from within the forts. But at the same time, we see the anti-Titan shells rip them apart so incredibly fast that you'd almost think that Marley is cooked. We already know that this war started because technology is catching up to the Titans. But right on the heels of that, we see Reiner parachuting in, noting the number of anti-Titan artillery and defenses he must rip up. And of course, yes, this is also the origin of...
I'm sick and tired of all these walls.
And while I use it as a funny, goofy meme, I actually think it's a really strong example of world building. The Titans are not just a parody exclusive threat. This is a point to show that other, far-off nations also went down a very similar tech tree, if you will. The only really unique thing about parody is the Iceburst Stone. The rest of their strategies are likely employed all around the world, because they just kinda make sense. As far as Reiner's flashbacks go, we're not going to talk about it today because that's like literally most of the upcoming arc, but the only thing I want to note here is note how this is the only scene in this entire episode that is actually full of color. Reiner is supposed to hate parody, it's supposed to be a traumatic memory, but that is the only warm, almost dreamy sequence in this entire episode. But as the music kicks into high gear yet again, I have nothing to overanalyze here. This sequence is genuinely perfect. The shift in the music as Reiner realizes he's being hammered by yet another anti-Titan train is excellent. And seeing even him being torn to shreds is also a big wake-up call that we are now operating on a completely different level. Remember that it took every last one of the Thunder Spears to get through his armor. Here, he is losing entire limbs like it's nothing. And then the music picks up again as Porco shows up, and the use of slow motion here is another perfect example of leveraging CG over 2D. And also, Reiner using the tank as a shield and then him throwing it is just so cool. And the music then fading to that slightly eerie tone as we see the entire fort now eviscerated, but even then it's not over because Zeke flies in. You know my whole 10 out of 10 no notes? Yeah, I use that as a joke, but this time, genuinely, 10 out of 10 no notes. One thing I do want to note, however, is the tiny bits of characterization we see with Zeke. Like I mentioned earlier, big parts of this episode is just recap of where we are at the start of this entirely new saga. So him referencing their defeat as the thing that started this war and then muttering that war is a bad thing, I think is all subtle reminders that Zeke's ultimate goal of the euthanasia plan is not actually aligned with Marley's desired conquest. And speaking of reminders, the big monkey then uses the artillery shells to play some baseball. This is one of the more mixed scenes in terms of CG, but I think the direction mostly makes up for that. And what more than makes up for that is the next minute, because this is, and I mean this 100% genuinely, one of my favorite sequences in all of anime, period. The music direction, as we see Zeke notice that the ships are also firing back, only for Reiner to then get absolutely pounded and Zeke to re-emerge from the smoke with another throw, it is beautiful. The musical direction throughout this episode, and if you've been following the series thus far, you'll know that I talk about it all the time, I think throughout this entire series is one of the things that really brings it together. We've seen this so many times with the recap sections. The same exact sequences, with slightly different music, carry completely different meanings. So with scenes like this, when you use those ebbs and flows in the music, it just accentuates everything so much more. But it's not over just yet, because our future historian then fades in and talks about how, with their fleet lost, the Middle Eastern Federation signed a peace treaty on Marley's terms. And the visual storytelling here is also absolutely beautiful. As he talks about how, despite this victory, the world is realizing that the Titans are no longer an unstoppable force they once were, we see Reiner absolutely annihilated on the ground. And as we get this somber shot of his bloodied hand with Zeke in the background, the new ED song fades in as he says, Marley knows it has no time to waste in reclaiming the Founder. This is absolutely one of those times where the ED fades into the episode itself and you're just left there with your mouth slightly agape because here we go again. The onslaught we just saw, that was a very sad glimpse into what Parody is about to face. And I think that is also true with Zeke. I think him seeing even the armor titan annihilated on the ground is another reminder of why he pursues the euthanasia plan. The Eldian people are just being used as meat shields. He wants to put an end to it. More on Zeke's philosophy in Shiganshina and plenty more later on. And the final thing we see in this episode is the Marley in public all cheering at their victory. Only for us to then get a shot of a very mysterious but weirdly familiar man also picking up a newspaper. So yes, Jean, along with presumably many others from Paradis, is already on the continent. And speaking of the ED fading in, let us talk about the shockingly good ED titled Shock. This is not actually the full ED, as the premiere episode fades it all together, but let's briefly talk about this version as well. First off, from this point on, this series will unapologetically show Ymir within the paths, and this is a pretty good example of that. But secondly, I also think it's worth noting how incredibly brave it is to, first, make an episode with almost no familiar faces, second, make the intro not have any recognizable elements, and third, the ED also only has new faces and Reiner. It's very, very risky, even if temporary, to suddenly just drop all of your main characters and start telling a completely different story. But yes, this ED is just telling us that we'll be witnessing major parts of the story from this side of the wall. It also continues more of that, now very obvious Falcon foreshadowing, but I'ma be real with you, I just really like the abstract stringy boys. Like, come on, this bird, it's so cool, and I think it perfectly fits the lyrics too. I will live on after my bones are turned to dust is essentially visualized right here. The flaming bird explodes, but from its ashes comes a tree, and from that tree, endless colorful threads. Each of them is a story, each is a memory. I love it, it's beautiful. And on that note, that is episode 60. I can't believe we've actually caught up to the point where I was actively thinking about starting a YouTube channel. That's like what, 3-4 years ago now? It's been quite the journey. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. I love this. But yes, we are now in season 4 where everything is completely different. I hope you enjoy the new little intro. I had a lot of fun making it. I think it's really good. And yes, that's the end of my yapping there. Next time we're right into the Marley arc and figuring out just how depressed Reiner really is. So I hope to see you back as we continue overanalyzing Attack on Titan. And that's the video. Just a couple of more things while I still have your attention. Number one, there's going to be a little bonus Attack on Titan video coming hopefully in the next couple of weeks, right alongside the main Overanalyzing series. It's going to be a bit of an experiment for the channel in terms of format, but I hope you enjoy it, and if not, well, the main series is still going to be going on, nothing's changing about that. And number two, if you're looking for Christmas shopping, there might be a very special thing coming to the merch store very soon, so keep an eye out for that. Oh, and actually there's one more thing. For the Attack on Titan anniversary, Isayama did like a Q&A type of deal, and he answered a few questions that were sort of obvious, but getting them answered was also kind of surprising. Essentially what he confirmed is that the Wall Titans are indeed just people, so those people we saw in the Season 2 ED, I guess those are them waking up after the rumbling? Again, that is a completely logical and obvious conclusion based on the stuff we see in the series, but still, those actually being people? Yeah, I talk about that a bit more on the second channel. But all that being said, I want to give a massive thank you to our current patrons and YouTube members who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And let's also give a warm welcome to the newest members of the team. Tadas Triaukas, that's a Lithuanian name, but I've got no idea how you pronounce that. Mad God, Tommy, Driava, I think, Devin Edwards, and Dylan. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my rambling, so seriously, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching, I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!